Alright, hi, I'm AquilaCat. As I mentioned in my post a couple of days ago, I'm going to go over all the supernatural experiences I've had. So I'm going to go through all of them, but there's one in particular that's the reason why I decided to make this entire video. So to start off with, I guess I should say that both my parents and my sister have experienced things that can't be explained. Mom thinks it's demons, Dad and my sister think they're ghosts. Who knows, really? But the first experience for me, I don't even remember. My mom and my dad told me about it later. So because I can't remember, I must have been about 2 or 3 at the time. And what happened was I ended up going out to the living room and just straight up telling Mom and Dad something along the lines of, Uncle Roger was sad because his plane got shot down and he couldn't see his mommy. And I had never been told about my great uncle Roger. Both he and my grandfather fought in World War II. But it's true. I have a great uncle named Roger who was in the Air Force in World War II, whose plane got shot down, and they never recovered his body or the plane. So he was technically missing in action, I guess. But yeah, my mom and dad obviously believed me because I had never heard of that family member before. So yeah, there was that. The first one I do remember was when we lived in a trailer park in a motorhome. So I must have been like 4 to 6, somewhere around there. But I would get up at night hearing what sounded like an anchor woman or anchor man on the TV, like some news program was on. And I would walk down the hall from my room, which was at one end of the trailer. And then the living room area was around in the middle. And as I approached the living room, the sound would get quieter, and then as soon as I looked at the TV, the sound was gone, and the TV was off and hadn't been on, no one was awake, because it was the middle of the night. That happened a few times, where it sounded loud enough that I could hear it from my room, and then it just kept getting quieter as I tried to seek it out, and then it was gone. And then the next one is the one that I really wanted to talk about, which happened when I must have been 6 or 7 years old, because I think my sister was born at the time, but wasn't very old. And that's the Hat Man. I don't know if you all have ever heard of the Hat Man or not, but there's a whole bunch of theories, like as to why he appears. Like either he's a harbinger of doom, or he clings to negative energy, or whatever. I don't know. All I know is that I was pretending to be a cat, like you do. And I was jumping, so we have the living room. Okay, so we have the living room over here, and then there's a hallway that led to my bedroom off to this side and the playroom on the opposite side of the hallway. So 2 rooms, hallway, living room. And where I was in the living room, I was jumping across and turning around and jumping across a treadmill, pretending to be a cat. And I could see the hallway whenever I made a pass to turn one way. And so I very, very, very clearly remember jumping over, turning around, and as soon as I glanced down the hallway, I saw a silhouette, I guess is the only way I could describe it. Like it was human-shaped. It came across as male. It looked like he was wearing a wide-brimmed, kind of like a detective hat, but with a wider brim. And I couldn't see his face. It was just complete shadow, just cloaked in shadow, complete darkness. I couldn't see any features at all. And I couldn't see features of the hat or the clothes he was wearing either, but I could see the silhouette, which is how I could see the silhouette of the hat, and then what looked to be a silhouette of a trench coat, and then like boots. But I saw him run across the hallway from my room all the way across to the playroom, and then I'll kind of show you what he did. So like, then like peeked out at me like that with like one hand right below him on the door frame, and then like I could see part of the hem of his coat as his foot was peeking out, and then he retreated back into the room. And as soon as I saw him, I was overcome with such an intense fear that I have only ever felt since in sleep paralysis. Like nothing else I have ever seen gave me this feeling. And it scared me so much that I refused to be alone downstairs after that for a few years. And I refused to sleep in my room after that. And like, because my parents could tell how very obviously it was freaking me out, they ended up having to move my bedroom upstairs. And again, for a few years after that, I would not go downstairs alone, and thankfully I didn't have to. Like, we call it downstairs, but like the ground level was the top floor, and then the underground level was downstairs. So like kind of a basement area, but not, because it wasn't actually a basement. Like, we had a living room, a hallway, and then another room off of the living room. And yeah, so refused to go alone downstairs for a few years, and even when I got older, I would venture downstairs on my own if I had to grab something, but I would be scared the entire time. It felt like something was watching me, and I would dash up the stairs as quickly as I heckin' could, because it was scary. I didn't like it. And even now, when I go and visit my parents back home in Utah, like, it still feels like there's something down there. Like, I've only ever seen him once, but I know there's something down there that I would really rather not have any interaction with ever again. And the fact that it's a ground level comes into play later. So, going back to one of the theories that I read about the Hat Man is that, like, he clings to negative energy or something. So, as soon as I saw the Hat Man, and once my parents realized how much it terrified me, they tried to look into it. And they found out that there's something the real estate agent hadn't told them. Because the gossip going around the neighborhood after that, when my parents started asking, was that, okay, so here's what the gossip was that the people who lived there before us had a son who they kept chained and locked in the downstairs basement area, and he starved to death in the home. And so for the longest time, that's what we thought it was. Like, it was just something that had been drawn to the negative energy that I saw, and that was it. It wasn't until, let's see, this last year, so not this past summer, but the summer before that, when I went to visit Utah the last time, that I asked my parents if I could look at the purchase documents for our house. And I found the name of the people who sold the house to them. And so with some quick Google searches of that name and, like star kid, abused child, things like that, a few articles ended up coming up. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, so I was able to find some articles that popped up. And I don't really want to say any names because I don't know if the parents' names would be able to be linked back to my parents' address. So I don't really want to do that. And also because this boy's younger brother, I believe, is still alive. So yeah, the truth that I found by Googling that and looking it up was that the neighborhood gossip was partway right. There was a family who lived in our house, but it wasn't the one right before us. These people lived in our house between like 1983 and 1985-ish, at least. And they had two boys. Both of them they punished by starving and a few other things. But it was the older boy who got it the most. And my neighbor, like around the corner and the house next to it, was the librarian at our local elementary school. And it was funny because I recognized her name in the articles that I found. But she had ended up calling Utah's version of DHS, so like the Utah Division of Family Services, a total of 5 times between 83 and 85, because it was obvious that this kid had been starved and abused. And I also found like the appeal opinion for the parents when they tried to appeal their sentence. So in the appeal that I was reading, it stated that either the appeal or one of the articles, I'm only looking at one now, and this was like a year and a half ago that I first looked at it. So the librarian had called Utah Division Family Services 5 times between 1983 and 1985. And I read somewhere that the principal at the school had known about the abuse and noticed the abuse, and that the mother had even straight up told the principal not to feed the kid because it was part of their punishment, was withholding food. And the principal, thankfully, did not oblige that request, and they made sure to feed the kid every day at school. So at least he got some food that way. But when things got a bit too hot, I guess, for the family, they left in 1985, and they moved to Texas, Fort Worth, it says. And that is where the child eventually died. Died of starvation. Like, either in the appeal or in one of the articles, it mentioned that when the cops arrived, the kid was in a coma because of the starvation, and he had been chained in a hallway, I believe. He was on a mattress, chained in the hallway, and was just there and in a coma. And he ended up dying a few days later in the hospital. The younger boy was saved. He was rescued, and still alive to this day as far as I know. He ended up making a blog post much later when he was an adult about it, and about how he has his own family now, and it was just a really sad thing to read. But the parents were charged with homicide, aggravated kidnapping, and injury to a child. That's what they were charged with. I don't remember in reading the appeal what they were actually convicted of. But they were convicted. They were in prison. They still are. The appeal that they filed that I read was denied. So thankfully they can't hurt any more children. But that article was from 1992. We didn't move into the house until either right before or right after my sister was born, sometime between 95 and 97. But yeah, there was a gap between 1985 and the next 10-ish years where a different family lived there. So the neighborhood gossip was partly correct and partly not. Yes, there was a child who was abused and starved. I haven't seen anything to confirm that he was chained up in our house, just in the Texas home. And it was in Texas that he died, not in our home. So, yeah, that was interesting. But, yeah, that's the only theory I could think of, that the Hat Man, who many, many, many other people have seen, if you look online, and I believe them because I've seen it too. And I've met at least one person for sure in real life who has also seen him. Unfortunately, she sees him frequently. I'm really glad I don't. But yeah, the theory, I'm guessing, is that he was clinging to negative energy, or that was drawn to negative energy or something in the home from when the boy was abused. So that's the Hat Man when I was around 6 to 7 years old. So like 96 to 98, depending on the month. And then between there and my preteen years, it was mostly just like various things I would see in my peripheral vision in the corner of my eye, just like a quick swoosh of something, usually either white or beige, like a really bright white or kind of a beigeish color, just passing in my peripherals. I never got any feeling from them or anything. I just saw them, knew it was something weird, and when I looked, it wasn't there, and that happened frequently. The only other thing around that time was, I think it was my great-grandmother's chair, one of my ancestors' chair on my mom's side. It was just this really old wooden chair. with a really old but like red and gold antique-y kind of pattern. And no matter where it was in the house, whenever you sat in it, it was cold. Much colder than the room or the rest of the house. But the only feeling I ever got from that chair was comfort. Like it was a relief to sit in that chair. I really liked it. So there's that. Cold but soothing, I guess. The next biggish thing that happened was when sometime between 11 and 13 years old. I was in Girl Scouts at the time. We were at Trefoil Ranch in Utah. They have these, like it's this wooden log kind of foundation, and then kind of like a log cabin, but with like a tent canvasy roof. Not sure what those are called. But there were 4 of us to each of those, and that trip, it was my friend and me and a pair of twin girls. We had talked with these girls a little bit during the rest of camp and throughout, and the only thing that seemed odd or out of place was that one of them mentioned, I don't even remember the exact words, but something about their father that made me think that not everything was right at home. But the weird thing that happened was one night we were all asleep, and I woke up in the middle of the night because I had felt a light like flashing in front of my eyes on occasion. So I opened my eyes and looked around, and the source of the light was in the corner, next to a few feet away from one of the beds in the corner, where it looked like both twin girls were like crouched next to each other, and like they had a flashlight, and they were just slowly panning it across the log cabin thing. But I could see through them completely. And when I looked over to the side, I could see each of the twins in their beds. Like I could see their chests rising and falling as they slept. And my other friend was also asleep, and I could see her chest rising and falling as it slept. And like I didn't feel afraid looking at them, but then I was also really, really tired. I was just like, what the heck? And mostly just annoyed that the light was shining in my eyes frequently because they were panning it over, and each time they panned it over, it shone right into my eyes. But I only watched them for maybe 30 or 40 seconds and then closed my eyes and went back to bed. I don't remember if I ever talked to them about it or not. I think I just pretended that it didn't happen for a while. So yeah, obviously they weren't ghosts since they were alive, but like I don't know if it was astral projection or something. I have no idea. All I know is they were shining a light in my eyes, and I could see right through them to the other side of the like wooden log wall of the cabin thing. So after the Trefoil Ranch incident, where I must have been like 11 to 13 years old-ish, from then on throughout all my teenage years, sleep paralysis started becoming pretty common. Like it isn't so much now, but back then, and mostly high school, early college years, I would have sleep paralysis every few months. I think the first year it was like 3 or 4 times that year, and then maybe 2 or 3 times some of the following years. I don't know exactly how often it happened, but it happened somewhat frequently, a few times a year. And I don't remember which one is first or second or what, but there are 2 in particular that I remember. And the first one that I remember, it felt like, so with these ones, it was usually in the middle of the night where I had woken up and then shifted to go back to sleep, or it was right before I was going to sleep. It kind of just depended. But I remember just suddenly not being able to move. Like I could move my eyes around, but I couldn't move my body. And I felt like it was weird because I felt it and I also kind of saw it in my mind's eye, what was associated with it. So what I felt was an indentation on the bed right next to me. that at first I just assumed was my cat jumping up and curling up next to me. And like my body actually like moved a little bit with the indentation. So it was there. That indent happened. I felt it. But in my mind's eye, I also had the image of this woman with long dark hair, like leaning over me, like with her arm leaned over me, and it was her hand hitting the bed that caused the indentation. And I also heard a voice, which I think was her, that said something about, like, remember when we were in the wheat fields or something like that. And then I got another image in my mind's eye of this field of, like, barley or wheat or something. And there were two people who I think were making out or something. It was hard to tell because I could only see their feet, but they were all kind of intertwined. And that's most of what I remember from that one. But the whole time that this was going on, as soon as I started feeling paralyzed, I was overcome with this intense fear and feeling of dread. Like if I didn't break out of this somehow, something really, 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 really bad is going to happen, and I don't want to wait to find out what that is. So when I was like seeing and hearing and feeling all this going on, I was just putting all my focus on just moving a finger or a toe, moving something. And it took, I don't even know how long, maybe only like 20, 30 seconds or something. But I was finally able to wiggle my toe. And that instantly broke me out of it, and I was able to move, and I was freaking the heck out. But that was one of them. The other one that I really remember is, I don't remember what I saw or heard or felt during it, but I remember how it started, which was different than the others, where I heard the sound like right behind me of a zipper just being pulled up, like right behind me, inside of me, I don't know, just like right behind me, a zipper sound from like basically going up my spine. It sounded like a zipper, and then I was frozen and I couldn't move. I was paralyzed in sleep paralysis. And again, I just immediately focused all my attention on moving a toe because that had worked before. And it didn't take long, I don't know, maybe like 10 seconds that time for me to finally be able to move a toe, and then I broke out of it and I was okay. There was another instance of sleep paralysis, but I'll mention that later. And I know that there's a scientific explanation for sleep paralysis, that it's just basically your body falling asleep before your brain. But it certainly feels supernatural when it's happening. Like there's no way to really describe exactly how that is unless you've gone through it yourself. But it feels supernatural, like it feels other. But after the sleep paralysis, throughout my teenage years, nothing much else happened. And then when I moved out of the house with some friends into an apartment, I must have been around 21, 22 years old. And my roommate, my friend, and I were walking down the street to go to the store. And, well, no, I guess we were walking back at that point. But there was a huge golf course between the store and our apartment complex. And we heard this inhuman screech. It was like something between a baby shrieking in pain and a chihuahua shrieking in pain and something else. But it immediately put both of us on edge. We both knew that something was immediately wrong, and we couldn't see anything. And we both instantly just started running toward our apartment. And it sounded like the thing was following us as we ran. Like it sounded like it was off in the distance, like, I don't know, maybe quarter mile, half a mile away in the golf course. But as we ran, sorry, my cats. But as we ran through, or ran past it, it sounded like the sound was following us, and it made that sound every few seconds. And it stopped when we passed the golf course, it stopped. Or it either stopped or it just didn't keep moving. It just stayed in the golf course area. But both of us experienced that. It was hellish. Didn't like it. And then sometime around then, or right after, so like 22, 23 years oldish, the same, both of us, my roommate and I, and a few of our other friends, decided to do something stupid at night and go to the train station in Ogden, Utah at night when we weren't supposed to. And we just walked through, checked out the trains, and it was fine. There was one train car we passed where all the other ones had been closed up for the day. Like, they were closed, you couldn't see into them, couldn't get into them, anything. But this one car that we passed by, the door was wide open, and it was completely dark inside. And we all, like, felt the fear of whatever was in there. There was something bad in there. We didn't want to know what. We just walked right past it and pretended it didn't exist. And then nothing else happened for maybe 15, 20 minutes or 10 minutes. I don't know. Time is weird. That was years ago. But a few minutes later, we were near the outskirts of the train station, and there was a front car, like one of the ones with the windows on the top. And it was a fair distance away. Like, we were on the ground maybe like 30 feet away from the actual train car. And then the window, was high up enough that it ended up being a pretty fair distance from it. So we couldn't really see any details or clearly see into the window, especially with it being dark at the time. But there was a figure in there that we could see through the window. And we all saw it. And it moved ever so slightly. Like, if this is the figure, it just moved just a little bit. And I couldn't see much detail, but it looked kind of scarecrow-ish, I guess, with the shape. I don't know, it was hard to tell. I only saw it for a split second because I felt a fear. And two of our friends in that group are really, really sensitive to spiritual things. And they didn't wait around. Like, this whole thing, from the time that we looked in the window to when we ran, was probably a second and a half. They were gone in like half a second. They saw it, they instantly fled. The rest of us saw it and then saw them fleeing. And when two people who are more like spiritually in tune than the rest of you are book it the hell away, you also book it the hell away. So we ran. So no idea what that was. It might have been just a person in there, one of the workers playing a prank on us or something, trying to scare away the kids who shouldn't be there. I don't know, but it was still, I can still consider it one of the incidents. And then nothing else happened for a few years. So that was when I was like 22, 23. By the time I got here to Oregon in our last apartment, probably when I was like 26 to 27 or 28 years old, there was just one particular bedroom, not mine, but like the third roommate's bedroom. So like there was me, one of the friends I moved up here with, and like three of us ended up moving into that apartment, but one of them ended up leaving a few months later, so the other friend and I just kept like rotating a third roommate through for a few years when we had that apartment. And it was that third roommate's bedroom that had the issues. So there was never anything in particular that was bad or super obvious or anything, but there would be times where the door like cracked open on its own when we had known that it was completely shut. And a few, maybe it was just one of our roommates kept claiming a couple times for a few days she had been saying that there was a strange noise in her room that she couldn't identify, she couldn't place, she couldn't find anything. And we looked with her and we couldn't find anything. So just a couple weird things like that. Doors opening, strange noises that couldn't be identified. Could be nothing, could be something. We don't know. Who knows? And then the last incident that I've had was when I was 28 years old, 2 years ago. A little over 2 years ago, after my cat Molly died. So this was around the time that I was posting those in memory of videos for my cat Molly. And if you don't know, I think I put it in there, but she had cancer. Like when I first got her, she was 7 years old and she had a tumor on her bladder. I worked at a veterinary clinic at the time, and her previous family couldn't pay for it, so they signed her over to the clinic. We did the surgery. She was fine. She was a clinic cat for a while, and then I eventually took her home. 7 years later, when she was 14 years old, 2 years ago, she had cancer again. And I ended up okaying an exploratory surgery to get it removed. And we weren't sure how bad it was until they opened her, but she ended up dying on the table within about 10 minutes. She just wasn't strong enough to handle the anesthesia, and apparently they wouldn't have been able to take it out anyway, because it had spread too far and too much throughout her body. But there were a few things that I noticed after her death. Like, I had been really worried about her soul, I guess, I don't know, that it might be trapped at the vet clinic, because I had left her with them, and left her carrier with them, and they had called me, or I had called them that night of the surgery, and said, hey, I just got off the phone with Care Credit, I got an increase on my balance, even if it's more complex than you think, I can pay for the surgery, just get the cancer out of her. And that's when the veterinarian told me that she had passed away. The following morning, I went there to, what did I even go there for? To okay the cremation or something? I don't even know. I went there the following day, and they asked me if I wanted her cat carrier back. And I said no. I just couldn't handle having it back at that time. So I left it with them. And then I immediately felt guilty about it when I got home, because I thought that her soul might be connected to her carrier, and so she was trapped at the vet clinic, and just that added on to the grief was a bad time. But a week or so later, when she had been cremated and they got the ashes back, on my way to pick up her ashes, on her way to the clinic, I just got this mental image of Molly and her cat carrier next to me on the passenger seat. Just for a moment, just a small little flash of an image or memory or something, I don't even know. But it gave me a little bit of relief, made me a little happy. And so I picked up her ashes, brought her home, and, then I was a mess for a month. Complete wreck. But a month and a half later, I had another instance of sleep paralysis. And this was the first time I had had sleep paralysis where I didn't feel that overwhelming sense of dread and fear. It was completely calm. I had just woken up, and then I was paralyzed, and I felt a cat jump up onto my bed, like onto my pillow right behind my head. And I saw a flash in my peripheral vision of like a tail. I think it was a tail or a whisker or something. And then I remember the only reason that I wanted to move during the sleep paralysis was so I could lift up an arm to pet the cat. And then it walked behind me on the pillow to the other side of my head, and I saw another flash of a whisker or a tail. and then it jumped off the bed. And as soon as it jumped off the bed, I was able to move again. And like I was still grieving. It was still hard, but I wasn't as debilitated by the grief, I guess, after that. It kind of brought a sense of calm and relief. Kind of like she was saying she was okay, wherever she was at. And it was shortly after that that I felt like I could get another cat into my life again. I needed one, because I can't go too long without something to love. That kitten over there is the one ended up filling that particular hole in my heart. You can see her in the corner there. But yeah, that was the last like supernatural kind of incident that I've had. And that was when I was 28 years old, about 2 years ago. And I haven't had anything else since, except like the occasional like gut feeling or sense that something was wrong, that kind of thing. Or walking into an area and thinking, this isn't the best place, something happened here, but I don't know what, and I'd rather not stay here for long. But I haven't seen any ghosts or apparitions or anything since the train station when I was like 22, 23. But yeah, what sparked this video was me having a conversation with one of my friends when I went to visit her for Christmas, where she was talking about the things that she sees, that she has seen, and I was talking about the things that I had seen and gone through, and how they were different. Like, she's seen things that I previously didn't believe existed, so that kind of made me open up my mind a little bit, and she isn't one to lie. Like, she has no reason to. So yeah, that just made me think about how things might be different, like, different perception of life, I guess. And like, I'm not religious. I'm agnostic. I don't know what the truth is, and I don't care. All I know is that I was raised Mormon, and then by the time I was 10, I just realized that whoever I was praying to wasn't there. I just didn't sense that there was a deity out there listening. There might be a God. There might be multiple gods. God might have been an alien. I don't know. Or gods might have been aliens, and they might have been more heavily involved in humanity in the beginning, and then now have just like ollied out and left us alone. I have no idea. I don't really care what the truth is. I'll find out after I die. I'll just be the best that I can be until then. Whatever. But it just opened up my eyes a little bit to like religious beings like angels and demons versus just like ghosts and apparitions and like benign versus malevolent spirits, things like that. I have no idea how it all interconnects. I have no idea everything that's out there. All I know is that there are things that happen that we can't explain. And that's that. So, the other part of the reason that I made this is because I want to hear what all of you have experienced. Like, especially if you've seen the Hat Man, I want to hear about that for sure. But also just if anything similar has happened, or if you've seen something completely different, I don't know, share with me. And that's all, I guess. Thank you for listening, and bye.